our, oh, sorry. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our, hi, Christine, I saw you waving. Thank you for joining us for our June general membership meeting. We have a really fantastic agenda in store for you today. We don't have any committee reports, and if somebody is unmuted, if they can please mute themselves. I'm getting some feedback. Somebody's doing dishes, I believe. But if, so I want to say thank you so much for joining us. We've got a really full agenda, and we've got some really great information from Supervisor Rodney Lusk about a lot of different initiatives that's going around in the Fairfax County community. But before we start with Supervisor Lusk and various members of our committee and our committee chair, Lavoisier, I would like to please introduce Reverend Linda Alacudo, who is going to take us in opening prayer. Reverend Alacudo. I believe we're still waiting for Reverend Alacudo for her audio to connect. So please give us a few moments. But before I do, what I can do is let you guys know that we've got some really great events that are going to be coming up. Our July general membership meeting, we're going to be focusing on fair and affordable housing, and our housing committee chair, Mary Padding, will be giving us an update on that, as well as the recently published report on the leasing practices and some of the discriminatory practices that have been identified by this analysis. So committee member Mary Padding will be giving us an update on that in July. Our August general membership meeting, we will be meeting in person. Yay, first time in quite a while. We will be at the Mulligan's Golf Clubhouse over at Pembroke. We'll be sending out information about that. We want that to be as informative, but also social, since we've not been able to join with each other in fellowship in person for quite some time. And then our September meeting, we're going to be talking about a lot of the different things that we can expect to see on the ballot coming up in November and why voting is important. We're going to hear from election experts who are going to talk about past and election behaviors, as well as voting behaviors for folks who are interested in the environment and what you can do and make sure that the person that you vote in also places the environment in top priority. And then we're going to have our Freedom Fund in October, on October 1st, and we're about to launch our annual fundraiser in June 25th. So stay tuned, look out on our social media or Facebook for all of this information. And I'm going to see if Reverend Alacudo has connected and is available to take us in opening prayer. Reverend Alacudo, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me, President Camblin. Before I pray, I just want to say thank you, first of all, to the Youth Council for the Juneteenth event last week. We were able to participate with them in what I believe was a momentous occasion. For those of you who don't know, the Bull Run event at Juneteenth was to dedicate a cemetery and a church that was recently discovered. So there were 91 enslaved graves that were located at that site, and what was thought to be one of the first Baptist churches where both enslaved and free could worship together. And I think that was a significant event, especially when you talk about things like social justice. Robert Carter, who was the plantation owner, had a spiritual awakening in 1791. And if you know your history and think about that, The Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1818, I can't remember my dates now, but almost 100 years later. And we then celebrate Juneteenth 2 years after it was signed. So again, thinking about that, 100 years before the Emancipation Proclamation, this person had a spiritual awakening. I believe that's important because what I believe is that to have social justice or racial justice, you first have to have reconciliation. And spiritual awakening is really another way of saying reconciliation. So I believe that a flame is there, and that event helped to strengthen that flame. And so I believe that we will see things in this area, in our region, that take that, what was started there Juneteenth last week, and take it further in the county of Fairfax. So with that, I want to open with prayer and just ask those of you who know this prayer to join with me. And if this is not your faith tradition, I identify as Christian, and I know that there are other people who identify with other faiths. If you just listen to the words of this prayer, I believe that your faith tradition will help you come into agreement with what I'm saying. And then at the end of that, if you agree and say amen, then bless you. Our Father in heaven, holy is your name. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, our trespasses, as we forgive those who are indebted to us and who trespass us. Don't let us be led into evil, but deliver us from evil and the evil one. For yours is the kingdom, and yours is the glory, and yours is the power. Amen. Thank you. Thank you, President Gamlin. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Alacuto. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Supervisor Rodney Lusk. He's going to be taking us through a series of conversations, starting with telling us about the wonderful community center that he just kicked off in the Lee District area. And then he's going to have a conversation talking with us and various members of our Criminal Justice Committee, discussing things such as data transparency, what we're doing to improve that here in the county, where we are with finding solutions to some of the things that were identified in the excessive use of force report written by, as well as sharing with us in a conversation with the executive director of the Police Civilian Review Panel. So Supervisor Rodney Lusk was sworn in as Fairfax County Lee District Supervisor in January of 2020. And prior to being elected as the Lee District Supervisor, he served 32 years as a Fairfax County employee, which including roles delivering human services along the historic Richmond corridor. His priorities while in office include opening a workforce development center, which he's here to talk to us about, reforming police policy, and addressing affordable housing crisis here in Fairfax, among so many other things. And he also serves as the chair of the Board of Supervisors Public Safety Committee. So with that, I would like to say thank you for joining us here today, Supervisor Lusk, and I will open it up to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. I'm delighted to be here, and I will say I also enjoyed the event at Bull Run. I had the opportunity to stop by, and I will say I couldn't stay. I apologize. We had so many things on the calendar, but I got the opportunity to hear some of the earlier presentations and had a couple minutes to talk as well, but very, very nicely done. So let me start by talking a bit about the workforce investment, the Workforce Innovation and Skills Hub. So this is something we've been working on in the office for about 2.5 years, and Matt Renninger, who's my chief of staff, he's been working pretty diligently with me since we got into the position here. So think about this. The area that I represent along the Richmond Highway corridor is one of the most disadvantaged areas as it relates to income, health outcomes, number of kids that are on free and reduced lunch. And I'll be frank here in saying, in many cases, this community has been somewhat left behind. I noted when we started to see the impacts of COVID kind of early on that we had somewhere around 90% of the residents in this community along the Jana-Lee-Buckman Road loop had lost their jobs because they were principally working in hospitality trades, service-based trades, restaurant work. And when the stay-at-home orders were enacted by the governor a few years ago, it was clear that if you didn't have access to Zoom, you couldn't work remotely, then you were going to be pretty much out of a job. And in many cases, these residents basically did not have any additional funds to support them. They ended up, needing food, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, and other critical services. So I'll say, acknowledging that we had kind of a difficult situation even before COVID, as we rolled into COVID, it became even more clear to me that we needed to do more to try to support and help these particular residents. And the way that we're going to help them is to give them access to better job opportunities. And the way we're going to do that is to build up their skills. And we have been talking to pretty much all the building trades over that course of time. We've gotten them all signed on. We have all of the DC metro area trades in our program committed to providing both pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programming and training. We also have negotiated with the folks at Nova Hospital, Dominion Energy, and Amazon. There are specific jobs that we have at the end of our process that they'll be eligible to move into, and we know what certifications, what skills they need in order to move into those jobs. So we're going to work down this continuum. We'll provide intake services, case management services, then we'll provide the training, and we'll get these individuals into these jobs. We are focused, we're talking about like a laser focus on jobs that are going to pay them a competitive wage, right? So most of the folks on the corridor have been working in kind of retail positions, as I mentioned earlier, hospitality positions, and in many cases, they pay minimum wage. Most of the folks are probably in the $12 to $14 per hour range. We're looking to get them started kind of at the floor around $20 to $24 per hour. So we're going to be looking at about $42,000 to $48,000 a year as a starting salary for the folks who live in this community. And the beauty, I think, here is that we can use kind of the office of the supervisor. And what I've learned is we do all these development cases. We support the advancement of projects like, say, Nova Health Systems. They want to build a large hospital system in the Lee District. We're going to support them in moving forward with that project, but we're asking them to support us by enabling the community to be able to help build that new center. To build 750,000 square feet, you're going to hire hundreds and hundreds of skilled laborers. And I want them to commit to say, not guaranteeing a job, but you're going to guarantee an opportunity. So we'll know what positions are going to be needed, what trades, what disciplines, what certifications, what security measures, and then we're going to identify folks that we trained in our center to be able to go and work in that particular job site. And we're doing the same with Amazon and all of the other folks that we're talking to. And what I've found is that, this has not been done before. There's been no previous kind of effort to connect projects to the communities that would be able to help build those projects, one. And then two, once the project is built, you want to have a way for the folks who can come into some of the entry-level positions to be able to do that. So for example, with Amazon, they're going to build 240,000 square feet of data center in our district, but they're going to also be hiring, once that data center is open, somewhere between 60 and 70 data center operators. What skill set do you need to have to be a data center operator? What certifications? Same sort of questions we're asking with the folks at Nova Health Systems, we're asking with the folks at Amazon. And we want to figure out how we can help prepare our residents in Lee to be able to compete for those data center operator positions, and they pay very competitively. So this center is scheduled to open. Give you a little update here. I think, Karen, you were at our original kind of opening for the center, but the community center opened first. We have to build out the workforce innovation and skills hub, and that's being done as we speak. It will be completed by the end of July. So we are expecting we'll do another ribbon cutting of it. The really cool thing that I can share here is it's about 8,000 square feet. It will have classroom space. It will have space for folks who want to learn how to weld, folks who want to learn how to do electrical and component work, folks who want to learn how to do carpentry. And then we'll have just a big multi-purpose area that we can do events and discussions on different types of professions. We'll be teaching kids how to assemble, program, and fly drones in the center. We want to demystify technology so that we can have our young members of our community and their parents learn about what opportunities they may be able to avail themselves to. And the sad thing is when you think about the corridor, and this is really, really unfortunate from my perspective, as a former economic development director, it was my job to recruit businesses into Fairfax County, and we were successful in bringing those businesses to Fairfax, but they went to the north and the western parts of Fairfax County, Tysons, Reston, Herndon. So my thing is like, how do we get companies to come to the southeastern portion along Richmond Highway? So we're going to have to be the catalyst, because it's not going to happen on their own. The companies don't want to come to places where their suppliers aren't, their competitors aren't, and where their customers aren't. And I hate to say it, it's almost like companies tend to be almost like lemmings. They kind of go to the same areas, and software developers like to be where other software developers are. Data center folks want to be where other data center folks are. They just have this, how do I say it? This concentration and aggregation of businesses. And what we have to do, and this is kind of the test that we're going to sort of prove out here, is looking at emerging technologies, looking at sensor technologies, looking at things like drones, looking at 3D printing, looking at AR, VR, and trying to figure out how we can incentivize and support company formation along the Richmond Highway corridor, and to start to plant seeds and to see those companies kind of grow and develop over time, and that we'll have a base, hopefully, of companies that we can point to and say, the Richmond Highway corridor is now a center for companies that are in drone, sensor, construction technologies, you name the area, we're going to be pushing in a number of these, because we don't know for sure what's going to be the hit. But what we do know is if we do nothing, we'll continue to have exactly what we have today. So we're swinging at the fence, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do this, because I think in the end, it is going to be transformational for the lives of the people who live in this community. I didn't express this to you earlier, but I worked in human services on Richmond Highway. I did direct service delivery in my early 20s. I know how difficult it is for a number of these residents to be able to survive and to live on this corridor. And I know that the residents here do not want to be in this situation. This is not by choice. I know lots of people want to blame the individuals and say it's because they haven't done what they're supposed to do. I'm going to make the point that it's just by luck that I'm not in that situation. I got opportunities. I had my grandparents, I had teachers, I had people who invested their time and energy in me, and I'm going to do the same for these folks, because they need the same support, they need the same encouragement. And if we can do this, we can move generations of people off of public assistance, and we can ensure that they have much brighter futures. So maybe with that, I can see if there's any questions about the Workforce Innovation and Skills Hub, and then I can move to the next topic, because I think we're about 7:20 here.
So if anyone has any questions, either raise your hand or put it in the chat. I don't see anything in the chat at this time. So since we don't see anybody with their hand raised, maybe we can move on to our next topic. And then if anybody thinks of anything, just go ahead and put it in the chat. We can definitely circle back on this, but this is a really great opportunity for having such an important and critical resource in the Richmond Highway Corridor, which is training for quality jobs and life-sustaining quality jobs. So that's that. Thank you so much for spearheading that. So I think our next part of the conversation is going to be led by Matt Soud, who is going to talk about the data transparency. So Matt, if you would like to join, I believe you have a presentation you want to share with us.
Yeah, I have some slides, but first, I guess I'd like to thank Supervisor Luss for all the help he's given us with respect to data. I know it's an important issue to you, and I'm glad you're always willing to listen when we have issues we want to talk about. I don't know if you want to say anything about data before we get started.
Yeah, I mean, maybe what I'll say is when I became the chair of the Public Safety Committee, it was kind of interesting. You might laugh at this. The Chairman McKay asked me to serve in this role. We had, at the time, the committee in the previous board had only met 1 or 2 times per year. So it was almost implied that this was a committee that you could kind of grow and develop into. And this was in January of 2020. Obviously, in March of 2020, there were some things that happened, George Floyd and other, and it became clear that this committee was going to have a more activist role. And one of the first things that I saw as being kind of the hallmark for me was to ensure that we had both accountability and transparency in our process, and to be able to basically allow for recommendations, ideas, suggestions, and comments to come in to a public website that we basically ended up creating, and then creating a data input matrix, so where people could actually comment and get all of that into one place. And I just want to articulate that the original comments that came in from the NAACP, NOVA EAC, ACLU People Power were so focused on data, and it became clear that that was going to be where we certainly needed to push a lot of our effort and time. And I just want to acknowledge that through the leadership of your organization and others, it became clear to us how important this issue is. So we are committed to continuing to work with our new chief as well to ensure that we have more data transparency, more ideas around how we can communicate with those in the broader community. So I just want to say that back to you as well, Matt. So thank you.
Thanks. All right, I have some slides I'm going to share with you. There's a lot in here, but I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, and then I'll put a link in the chat afterwards. So my name is Matt Soud. I'm here representing the chapter's Police Data and Transparency Subcommittee. Beth Goss, who's also here, is also on that committee. So I just want to talk a little bit about our subcommittee, and also about the state of data transparency in the FCPD. So our subcommittee was formed in July 2020, shortly after the George Floyd murder. And we kind of have 3 thrusts that we focus on. One's data transparency. It's the most basic thing. We want to see incident level data release. So for every single stop or use of force, we want to see that type of data, so that people can actually analyze it rather than the police analyzing what they want to show us. We also promote informative displays of data in the form of reports and dashboards so the public can get a basic understanding of what's going on. But we don't think that's sufficient. We think somebody's got to look at the data and then respond to it. So we do our own data analysis, but we also advocate for FCPD to analyze data for the disparity. We don't think that if they're taking this seriously, if they really believe in fairness and justice, they need to actually look at their data to see if there are problems. And if there are problems, they need to respond to them. So we're going to push for them to do that. So a few years ago, where we started was basically FCPD only released what we call summary data reports. Those are kind of like end of the year counts of the number of things that happened during the year. They did that for use of force, arrests, and traffic stops. The issue with that is when you do that, you tend to like summarize out all the key complexity in the data, and you can't do more detailed analysis where you can look at things from different angles, combine different factors to dig deeper and really figure out what's going on. You just get a real high level picture. Something might be wrong, but you can't say what. And so we're trying to get them to move towards something that, we can actually figure out what's going on. There have been some improvements in data transparency in FCPD. In August 2020, they started a committee on police data transparency that meets about monthly. And basically the community can make recommendations to FCPD and work with FCPD on improvements to transparency. Our group is on that committee. Myself and Luke Levasseur regularly attend those meetings. There's a few other local groups on there. They also started releasing incident level open data, so it's available to everyone on arrests, traffic citations, and traffic warnings. So there's a lot more detail there. We can actually analyze it in a little more detail. There's stuff about location, district, community member demographics, et cetera. And they also have dashboards associated with those, so you can kind of look at those. I think a big thing that's really important that Chief Davis and last summer hired a director of data, Dr. Noah Fritz. It's really key to have somebody actually working for the police who understands data and knows how to communicate about data and knows how to look at data. So I think that was a major development. Yeah. And we meet with him monthly to talk about data. However, I think the biggest thing that's happened in Fairfax County with regard to police data has not come from the police. It's come from what was called the Virginia Community Policing Act. It was enacted in 2020, and initially it required data to be collected on every single traffic stop. So for every traffic stop, you were getting demographics of who was stopped, the reason for the stop, the result of the stop, whether or not the person was searched, some really key data. And also that was required to be public released and analyzed by the state police on an annual basis. And then in 2021, they updated that to include investigatory stops, not just traffic stops, but also pedestrian stops, people stopped in the street for reasonable suspicion. And they also started including some other things like whether or not force was used during the stop. And I'd say besides location information, this data set is much more important to us and in terms of like what we can get out of it and learn from it than what FCPD is currently releasing. And if the faces of people are not in the way, this is kind of just a little bit of analysis that we did with that data to try to show what you can do with it. Initially, we were going to look at these blue bars on the right-hand side where it shows the arrest rates for stops or traffic violations. So what percentage of people are being arrested during a stop for a traffic violation? And what we were going to show was that, Black and Latino community members were being arrested at much greater rates during traffic stops than white community members. And then recently they put out a data update and we redid the analysis and we noticed all those numbers had dropped by a lot. And after July 1st of last year, the arrest rates for both Black and white folks are both equal and about 1%. And Latino has also gone down by not as much. They're kind of still an outlier. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge difference. And when we looked at the counts, which you can see on the left, you see in July 1st, 2021, you see a big drop across all groups and arrests at traffic stops. So this is the type of information through the monthly meetings we have with FCPD's data director, where we took this to them and said, hey, we'd like to better understand this and understand what's going on here and what's caused this. We know that laws go in effect in July, so it could be that. But we'd also like to know, is it something else, a change in policy, or is it some quirk in how you changed how you're recording data and we're missing some information now? We don't know, but this is not something we could do before. And now we also have an avenue to talk to the police about these sorts of things, which I think is a big improvement. Additionally, a few years ago, the Board of Supervisors, sorry, get tracking time here, hired the University of Texas at San Antonio to look at use of force disparities in Fairfax County. And they released a report on that last year. And then following that, the county put together the Community Advisory Committee, the CAC, which Luke will talk a little bit more on after this, to report and offer feedback on the recommendations made by UTSA. So UTSA made a bunch of recommendations. The CAC gave feedback on those recommendations and then reduced a few more. And I'll talk a little bit about the data recommendations that they made. But first, I'll kind of go through a few of the results from that study. And I will preface it by saying there's no like perfect universal way to analyze this type of data. So what they tried to do is do several different techniques and kind of pool the results. So it does result in some slightly contradictory results. The first result they gave that, you know, surprised both them and everyone else was that in the one analysis, they found that whites experienced the highest rates of force relative to how frequently they're arrested or they were suspected of committing a crime. They weren't sure why that was. It's possible there's actually bias in who gets arrested, and that kind of could mask any, you know, that could inflate the rate of force, relative rate of force for whites, or it could just be, that could be the way it is. We don't know, but that's something they found. They also found that blacks also experienced higher use of force rates than predicted based on those same metrics. They also found that blacks experience higher levels of use of force than whites. So in the same sort of circumstances, they found that officers were using more force against blacks than they were against whites. They were finding something similar for Latinos, although to a lesser degree, and that was mostly driven by Mount Vernon Police District, which was kind of an outlier in the whole study. They consistently found disparities in Mount Vernon, and they also found the same disparities in both use of force and level of force involving Black community members. And finally, the last thing I want to mention was they found that blacks were 1.8 times more likely than whites to have a weapon pointed at them. This is something we're currently talking to both Supervisor Lusk and Alcorn about. It's a concern to us because also we found that reported firearm pointing by FCPD against black overall, not just against black, we don't know how it breaks down, but it has really skyrocketed in the last few years. And we don't know if they weren't reporting it before, or if that's really an issue in our community. And it's something we're concerned about and we're talking to folks about. I'm not going to go through this. There were lots of data recommendations made by UTSA and the CAC. Here's a few of them. The main one I'd bring up that I think is most important is that the UTSA asked FCPD to start capturing all instances of force and resistance sequentially throughout an encounter, get a better idea of what's happening throughout an encounter in terms of the force used by both the police and the subject to enable better analysis. The CAC kind of took that one step further and like said, there's stuff that happens besides the force before the first use of force. So like, why was the person stopped, etc. That goes on before the stop, that should be tracked too, which I think would be very valuable. And one final item that we looked at, we did our own analysis of administrative investigations by the Internal Affairs Bureau and FCPD. And what we found was that there are very, very few disciplinary actions for FCPD officers for any allegation involving community members. So like with regard to like say prisoner safety, if someone makes an allegation about that, from 2015 to 2020, only 6% of those allegations resulted in disciplinary action. Allegations related to use of force, there were only 1.6% of allegations result in disciplinary action, and 0% of allegations of bias-based policing out of 185 over a period of 6 years resulted in disciplinary actions. And I think this is something we also want to bring up with the police. Those are just very, very low rates. We're concerned that they're defining these things very narrowly and then, you know, resulting in no one being disciplined. Those are just very low rates. to me at least. And finally, kind of just want to talk about our next steps. We're going to continue meeting monthly with the data director of FCPD. We're going to promote more data collection and public release for both stops and use of force. We'd like FCPD to lead the country in data transparency. We want to create our own police data dashboard to track metrics important to the chapter and to help provide public awareness on how FCPD is doing with regard to disparity. And finally, I think one thing is data people, we kind of tend to be hands off because we look at the numbers, we try to be fair and unbiased. But I think it's important that we also talk to the community and try to understand their concerns with regards to any problems they have with FCPD. And I think it'll help us better understand what to look at, what data is needed, and what sort of analysis can be done to kind of address those concerns. All right, thank you.
I guess we should ask if anybody has any questions for the data committee for Matt or Beth, who's on. If anybody in the anybody watching or participating in the meeting would like to ask any questions on data specifically. All right, we will. Oh wait, there's a question. Go ahead. Is it Joe?
Yes, thank you. This is not about the data. The only thing that I want to say that it's great that there is a work going forward and highlight the fact that you want to look at the community to validate and get a sense of what is going on in the community. But my point goes to Supervisor Lutz, if I may, and it is to understand how is going to be the process for the selection of the people that are going to be trained. It is first come, first serve, because obviously you cannot, or it is, availability for all the community. How is the next step? I think having collected, funds and the building already and the connections with the different companies that are going to be the partners on this amazing great initiative. But then sort of the next step, how is it that, because that from my experience working in other parts of the world on this, that may create conflicts, yes?
So no, I appreciate the question. Let me start by saying we do want to target the community of disadvantage that we are located in. So if you're familiar with, again, the Jana Lee, Buckman Road area, there are many, many residents in that community who need this type of support. So we're going to focus on them. What we've done is we've hired a contractor, Melwood. So Melwood has over 50 years experience in helping folks get into employment and using training as the vehicle and mechanism for that. They're supported by a group called Building Momentum, which is based in the city of Alexandria, and they do a lot of design thinking, helping people learn how to work in teams and to do collaboration. And I think that's going to be very, very helpful for our residents to learn those design thinking skills. But what's really, really critical here is that we've hired 2 members from the community, one in the Hispanic community and one in the African American community, to help us kind of move people into the program. So we know that we need trusted partners to kind of help message and build trust and rapport. So the 2 folks that we've hired have that trust, have that rapport with the community. And think about this, and even before opening the center, we've already gotten 5 people jobs. And those 5 people that we've gotten employed in the last month, all of them were displaced from employment in 2020. And the highest salary that they made up till that point was $14 per hour. And each of them currently is making $21 an hour and learning new skills. And a couple of them have gotten into a sensor technology area that's basically looking at how you can use a sensor to determine if the soil conditions are right for agriculture. And they've worked on these sensors to build them. And what they've learned over the course of the last month or so, is that they can make improvements to the design and the rigidity of those sensors. And what they've been able to do is to reduce the failure rate, which is roughly about 30 to 35%, down to 5%. And these are folks who never worked in tech, never touched a sensor, never built a sensor before. And it's just amazing to hear them talk about what they've already learned. This is the vision for this project. And we can already see, even with this little small group, that it's being proven out just in the last month. But we will focus on the folks in the community. I'll also pick up some folks from the Gum Springs area, because we know that Gum Springs is also an area of disadvantage, and try to get them into the program. And then what we'll do is we'll continue to grow it from year 1 to year 2 to year 3. So we'll be able to take more participants into the program, have more opportunities for those in the community who want access to the service. So I think we've got a pretty good pathway here. We'll track our folks for 3 years. So we'll make sure that they get the supports and services they need so that they're successful and get the additional training.
So I think why don't we take one more question, and
Sure.
I think Jenna had her hand up first, and if you don't mind, Mary, maybe we'll circle back to you when we're done with use of force. But Jenna, why don't you go ahead? If you have a quick question, we can, and it's about data, we can address that.
Great, thank you. It is about data. I'm sorry if I missed this, but do you have, or does the new reporting include individuals with disabilities? And if so, are you able to then track multiple categories? For example, someone who is Hispanic and also has a disability.
I do not believe there is information in the state data on disabilities, unfortunately. It's mainly whether or not they speak English, what race, ethnicity, age, gender.
All right. Oh, Mary, is it a quick question?
You're on mute, Mary.
You're on mute, Mary.
I was wondering what was the outcome of the increased use of force in the Mount Vernon district. I remember when that came out and a lot of people were saying, no, it's wrong, everything's wrong, it's not true. What was the upside of that, and were there any actions taken if that was true?
That seems perfect for Supervisor Lusk, if you know, since it's your area. But
yeah, I can't say that there's any specific follow-up from that initial report as it relates to the Mount Vernon district. We do have recommendations. I think you probably saw that came from the University of Texas with regard to that, and a couple of the recommendations were even to suggest cycling officers from the Mount Vernon district station to other stations and having a limit in terms of years of service that they can continue to operate in that one location. I know that there was a little pushback from the chief of police in the first conversation we had about that, but we have not finalized all of the recommendations yet, so we're still going through them. So I'll say we may have to stay tuned for what's going to be kind of the follow-up, Mary, in terms of any direct actions that we'll be taking specifically with regard to not just the Mount Vernon station, but it's Mount Vernon, Lee, and Mason. Because if you look at those stations too, you saw that there was some disproportionality in use of force amongst minority members at those other stations as well. But let me get back to you and give you a report once we've gotten some additional findings on that.
Supervisor Lusk, did you also just want to share briefly for anyone who didn't
Sure.
who didn't see the last Public Safety Committee meeting where we are on the implementation of some of those recommendations, because that might kind of answer Mary's questions, maybe not on the specific line items, but some of the CAC recommendations have already been implemented, and some of them will be applicable to this.
Yeah, I thought I was going to wait till Luke's presentation, because I think, Luke, are you going to talk about some of this first? And if you want, I can piggyback after you, because I figured that you were going to take that portion of the use of force. Is that correct?
I am, but I wasn't going to, just because of time limitations, I won't go into a huge amount of detail. But yeah, it would probably make sense for you to do that after.
Yeah,
so
I'll wait.
Move quickly to make sure you don't run out of time.
Yeah, thank you.
So just so everybody knows, we've been talking about data. Data is obviously a very nitty, down in the weeds kind of topic to focus on. And even though use of force issues obviously result, as they did after the murder of George Floyd, in people on the street and activism, a lot of the work of that we do in the branch with respect to use of force issues is looking at policy documents, looking at data, and trying to push forward changes to policy. And it seems weird to focus on, a general order and the details in a policy document, but the words that are in those policy documents really matter. Why do they matter? Because that's how police officers are trained. They're trained to the standards that are written in the policies that the police department adopts. What are the policies? They're a reflection of the values of the community. The truth is that when George Floyd happened, and that was when I first became really involved in these issues for the branch, the policy of the use of force policy of the Fairfax County Police Department was substantially better than a lot of police departments around the country and in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Why is that? Is because in 2013 there was a police involved shooting that resulted in a big political problem, dust up, and the Board of Supervisors created a panel in 2015 that it was an ad hoc commission or committee that proposed a lot of changes and improved use of force. Now, everything, even policies that are pretty good need to be improved, can be improved. And so that's what happened after George Floyd. The Board of Supervisors hired the UTSA to do a big study and to figure out how we can make the use of force policy in Fairfax County better. And the Community Advisory Committee, which I served on behalf of the NAACP, was the Board of Supervisors basically saying, we have this UTSA study, but we are not, and I guess we should just go on to the next slide. It's the Board of Supervisors said, we're not just going to implement what the UTSA said, we're going to listen to the community, and we want the community members to comment on this, analyze it. So we spent 3.5 months, had 4 extra 2-hour meetings analyzing all of these proposals. There's a huge amount of data, a huge amount of information that 15 members of the community went through, working collaboratively, all on Zoom meetings. Never met these people in person until we actually presented to the Board of Supervisors. And then we hugged because we, had worked so closely over Zoom. It was a very interesting experience. But we made a series of proposals, and I just want to call out the NAACP, before the Community Advisory Committee, before the UTSA issued its report, 3 members of the Criminal Justice Committee had done a deep dive into use of force policies and had developed our own proposal. That's Sada Fatash Bargi, Nair, Laura Doherty, and Isabel Gross, who are members of the use of force subcommittee of the Criminal Justice Committee, did a very good report that was submitted to the Community Advisory Committee, submitted ultimately to the police department, and was part of their analysis, I think, in developing what they ultimately are doing. Now, so with respect to the next slide, slide 4, we'll go to one of the members of the Community Advisory Committee. Unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight, but she recorded a couple of videos, and one of them is going to run now with respect to how the CAC process. So if you could run the video for 4. See how seamless this is.
Hello, my name is Yolanda Earl Thompson.
Yeah, use of technology sometimes isn't. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm not doing it. I had to be somebody competent.
Okay.
Sequoia community, and I had the privilege and honor to serve on the Use of Force Community Action Committee. We approached our charge in a holistic way with a range of lived experiences and perspectives from the police department. We had representatives from the FCPD attend our meetings, and they helped explain current FCPD policies, practices, and brought in their in-field personal experiences. This approach resulted in very active and candid insights from members of the communities who are directly impacted by the use of force, including residents of color and those living in the districts where use of force is frequently used, like myself. One of our overarching recommendations was to ensure that any change is rooted and guided by trauma informed perspectives that grants a higher value on the lived experiences of communities of color, youth, residents with mental and behavioral issues, as well as substance dependency. We also wanted to make sure that the perspective of being an immigrant and undocumented person was brought into the conversation, because these are people who are mostly impacted and have interaction with the law enforcement. We believe that while policy change is essential to reducing the unnecessary use of force, without cultural change, we realize that there's no internal or external policy that is going to make meaningful and impactful improvement. So we recognize the importance for a comprehensive use of data collection, and that it must be accommodated. So we can't just collect the data, we got to accommodate it with transparent community engagement. We have to make sure that we publicize this data in a way that the community can see it in a user-friendly format. That means that we minimize abbreviations and acronyms and the use of general orders where it's just a lot of alphabets and numbers and community members don't understand what is being shared with them. And we want to make sure that it's accessible, and just make sure that when I look at the data, I know exactly what I'm looking at, so that I can be actively involved in guiding the FCPD in a way to make sure that we have this trust in the community. That includes helping create a narrative and language that reflects that there's a new mindset that supports this building of trust between community and law enforcement, which means that there needs to be respectful terminology, including the data grouping, to combine race and ethnicity that reflects the community. Overarching, what we just wanted to make sure that they understood is that internal self-policing beyond policy, but improving the culture of FCPD and its integrity is crucial to making sure that this use of force policy is improved and that we are providing human-centered, holistic policing and trust building in our community.
So that was Yolanda Earl Thompson. She was a wonderful member of the CAC, the Community Advisory Committee. Let's go to slide 5, and I'll just tell you briefly. I'll try to expedite this. The way that it worked is the UTSA, issued a hundreds of pages opinion or report detailing a tremendous number of issues in use of force, and it had 9 policy recommendations. There were a bunch of data recommendations and some training and a bunch of training recommendations, but 9 policy recommendations. And they were along the lines of things like change the use of force reporting threshold, increase an increased emphasis on de-escalation, which, is just not talked about enough. It's talked about incessantly, and there is no way you can talk about it too much. Right. De-escalation is the most crucial thing, one of the most crucial things when it comes to policing, getting police officers to slow down situations. This is how they're trained. Again, this is the policy that becomes the reality of policing, is focusing on de-escalation. The police officers are supposed to, in difficult situations, they're supposed to be the grown-ups in the room who are calming things down. And a lot of the situations where police mess up is when they become the hotheads, and And this is what, Fairfax County, we want to make sure that we get the right police officers in, have the training to the right standards so that we don't have that situation. So that's just one issue. Now, then so as I said, the CAC, the Community Advisory Committee came in, studied, analyzed all of the recommendations, and agreed with many of the things the UTSA wanted and suggested. And the UTSA is a group of academics and social scientists. They made very thoughtful analysis, and we agreed with most of the things they suggested. What we frequently did is, and I was involved in this, and one of the other folks, somebody from ACLU People Power, worked very hard on preparing detailed additional recommendations, clarifying recommendations. It's a group of think tanks and people who specialize in policing. We didn't make stuff up.
I'll interrupt. Okay.
We didn't make stuff. We didn't make things up. We went and got the recommendations of the experts, incorporated them into our recommendations, and then FCPD largely accepted the UTSA's recommendations and many of the CAC recommendations, and then they rejected some of the things that we thought should be done.
Luke, can I interrupt there for just 1 second? I'm really sorry. We have just a jam-packed schedule tonight, and
all right,
we need to take Rodney to another meeting. So, Rodney, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say on the CAC really quickly before we.
Yeah, sorry, Luke, to do this.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Go right
we
ahead.
have a whole room full of people next door here. I have to go talk to them. So I just want to acknowledge again, thanks to Luke, thanks to Yolanda for the hard work, as well as all of the other CAC participants. I was just so impressed by the level of detail and the work product that was presented to the board when we had the discussion just a couple months back. And I just want to also acknowledge that for everyone here who's listening, we're going to make sure that all the recommendations that came from the CAC and the University of Texas San Antonio are addressed. We're going to make sure that they get loaded up and included in our community input matrix, and we're going to have check marks by the ones that are done, and then the ones that remain open, we're going to work with Chief Davis, work with NAACP and others to make sure we get those handled. So I just want to be clear that that's the role that I see myself as the chair of the Public Safety Committee, ensuring that we're making progress against each of these items. We did have a meeting about a month ago where Chief Davis came in and did present an update on a number of these items, and I can say things are looking good in terms of the police department's response and their engagement in terms of trying to get responses to these very, very important items. And to Luke's point on de-escalation, I believe exactly what he said. It is imperative that we get all of our police officers, men and women, trained in ICAT. ICAT is the proven de-escalation model that shows efficacy after the training, that people actually show an appreciable reduction in use of force. And to the point that Luke made before, you're basically getting the officers to think about time, distance, patience, cover, and I hate to say it, the most important thing here is just kind of bringing down the temperature. Really, de-escalation is really about ensuring that you don't reach for your weapon, you don't reach for your taser, you don't reach for your gun, you don't reach for your baton. You are using the words that are coming out of your mouth to be able to bring down that temperature and handle situations where you don't have to use force. So with that, I apologize, I'm going to probably have to conclude, but really enjoyed being a part of this discussion today, and I will continue to be engaged. I'm happy to come back at a future point, and Luke, we can maybe tag team that once we get it scheduled so we can talk about which recommendations we've been able to institute and which ones might still be outstanding. Okay.
All right, I appreciate that, and appreciate your leadership and all of your support for the CAC and these issues. I know that you didn't come onto the board thinking you were going to become the public safety guru, but
right.
you've done a great job, and certainly from the NAACP, we really appreciate your work and your leadership.
Thank
No,
you
you're
for
very-
joining us tonight, Supervisor Lusker. It's really great. And I understand how busy you are, and we really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, guys. I'll see you soon, okay?
All right. Thanks.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So if we go back to the sixth slide, just real quick, we can hit a few more things and then we'll take any questions. And actually, we've got another video from Yolanda. But so there were policy recommendations that were adopted. For instance, they revised some of the language around the duty to intervene, beefed it up. State law had changed a little bit, and they had to incorporate some of that, but they did increase the requirements on police officers with respect to duty to intervene. And by that I mean, if the police officer sees that another officer is doing something wrong, for instance, what happened to George Floyd, there was a duty to intervene in Minnesota, but they've made it stricter and they've made it tougher. Not perfect, never will be, but better. They clarified some of the issues around chokeholds. And again, a lot more emphasis on de-escalation, and there was already a fair amount of emphasis on that. And they prohibited prohibition regarding the use of deadly force against the fleeing felon were just some of the things. Now, this I think is slide 7. The recommendations not adopted. One of the big things that the NAACP use of force subcommittee had recommended is to move away from what is called objective reasonableness in the police's decision to what we view, and I think policing experts view, as a higher and better standard, which is the necessary and proportional standard. You say, well, what the heck's the difference between objective reasonableness and necessary and proportional? The problem with objective reasonableness is largely that it has been interpreted by the courts very narrowly to look at, when determining whether the police officer did something right or wrong, look only at the moment or two right before the police took out his gun and shot somebody, or instituted or took some other made another use of force decision. And to what we believe that does is, obviously we're not saying that the police shouldn't be able to defend him or herself in a crisis situation, and we recognize that there are split-second decisions that have to be made, and that we don't begrudge anybody that. But the objective reasonableness standard, by only focusing on that moment or two right before the force is applied, ignores very important information that happens in the time continuum, that things that led up to that for purposes certainly of civil liability after a use of force decision should be considered. And so that's why the necessary and proportional standard is a broader standard. It looks at a larger time frame. Some of the language in the use of force policy does kind of tip its hat towards necessary and proportional, but they don't adopt that standard expressly. And they said that they didn't. They didn't because they don't believe that it's consistent with Virginia law. It's true, there is language in the Virginia Code that talks about the objective reasonableness, but there's no explicit preclusion of a different standard, a higher standard. And there's this crazy issue called the Dillon rule that applies to Virginia law. I won't go into it because everybody would beg me to stop and pass out from boredom. But there's an argument that it isn't permissible. I don't agree with that argument, but and others don't. But anyway, they didn't adopt our recommendation. They also didn't adopt our request that are urging that they classify pointing a weapon at a community member as a use of force in and of itself. It's essentially brandishing a weapon. It isn't putting your hand on somebody and forcing them to do something manually or physically, but it is a very forceful act to point a gun at somebody. And so we thought that it is a reportable act, so it isn't a total loss, but it isn't as serious as we think it should be. And also with respect to issues like Chokeholds, they don't. Virginia law, it's illegal for a police officer to use a chokehold, but there are certain neck restraints that we think the language could have been more clear, but the police department hasn't adopted that language. And so there are other issues, but there's way too many to talk about. Why don't we go to the next slide, the next video real quick? I think it's a shorter video from Yolanda about the training recommendations, and then we'll just briefly hit on next steps, and then we'll switch over to the last section of the talk. Is the video
When it came to training, we
ready?
were unanimous in advancing the crisis intervention training and the co-responder models to give priority to behavioral health professions for handling incidents that involve persons with behavioral health and or intellectual or development disabilities. The committee thought it was crucial to modify the UTSA training and organization recommendations to include expanding with community involvement and consultation. This model, especially in neighborhoods that have been disproportionately impacted. We thought, when possible, is having behavioral health professions assist in the pre-arrest stage to reduce creating criminal records and to help decriminalize behavioral health and or intellectual development disabilities. We also thought that training needed to ensure that it was transparent and communicating its equity focus and cultural competency. So all training should have this equity lens and have cultural competency woven into it. We wanted to also make sure that the training had human-centered language and values and principles to help shift the mindsets of officers and build trust in the community. When the officers are trained with the language of the community, they will engage the community with that perspective. We thought it was important that this equity lens is rooted in understanding root causes, so having training on root causes, and then also making sure that there is meaningful community participation when it comes to officers training. So thank you.
All right, so I guess we can skip. The next slide is about next steps. Obviously, Supervisor Luss talked about the next steps, so I don't need to go into this too much. We will continue to work with, obviously, Matt continues to work in data. I will continue to work with the folks on the on use of force issues and the follow-up to this study and the other studies, and the other proposals. So let's see, I think that is, but we don't have a formal like meeting or process yet. Supervisor Luss talked about the matrix. So I'm sure we will have follow-up meetings with respect to that, and we'll be reporting back. So I don't know if we don't have a lot of time for questions, but let me just say that what I would like to do, this is obviously, Matt's discussion. Matt spent unbelievable amounts of time focusing on the data issues. He's just scratched the surface of what he and Beth and others have done. And if I think what I'd like to do is set up a meeting, make it available to anybody in the branch, but it will be a criminal justice committee meeting, but it'll be, basically a Q&A. Just ask anybody who's got any questions about policing data or use of force issues. We can just take questions. It can be very informal. And if we know the answer, we'll provide it. And if we don't, we'll find out and get back to you. So I think that what we'll do is we'll circulate something in the next 3 weeks about a meeting for anybody who's interested. And then obviously, if these issues are interesting to you and you want to dive in and become either a data nerd or a use of force policy nerd with us, or if you want to, help us organize to march to the streets, if there is, hopefully there won't be, but more than likely there will ultimately be some incident that is upsetting, and you want to help organize or do anything with respect to criminal justice, just shoot me an email at, I think it's actually, my email is on the website. It's the Criminal Justice Committee, or I'll put it in the chat. But are there any hands that anybody needs to ask a question? But we're running behind, and we need to get to Stephen Richardson, who very kindly came at the last minute to join us. And I saw him earlier. I hope he's still here. I don't see any hands raised, so we'll go to Stephen and Mike Waltz, who is the chair of the Legal Redress Committee, and we discovered is very, very knowledgeable about the Police Civilian Review Panel. So he is taking over. Mike and Stephen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Richardson. I've met a couple of you, haven't met many, but I am glad to be invited here tonight. Thank you very much, Luke. I really appreciate the invitation. And I must say that a lot of the work that you all have done is work that that's the direction that you're going in is the direction that I would like to steer the panel in. A lot of the studies, the data that you've already collected, a lot of those things are things that I think that the panel needs to take a closer look at as well. And so as the inaugural executive director, I have an opportunity, I believe, to kind of turn the ship a little bit and get the panel to be more focused, more comprehensive. And there also has to be an investigative capacity with the panel, I believe. It's one thing to review matters, but you also need to have an independent eye, looking at the investigations as well. So that's something that hopefully will happen down the line. But again, I am glad to be here this evening. The information has been incredible. I've worked very closely with Mr. Lusk's office and with the Board of Supervisors, as well as FCPD. And if you have any questions for me about my mandate, about the panel, I will be glad to answer.
Mike, you're on mute. I think you had some questions you wanted to throw at him, so go right ahead.
So Stephen, I don't know if you wanted to give any overview. I have questions, but you wanted to give a brief overview about how the Civilian Review Panel functions, my experience and my knowledge of them. I'll let you go first, and then you might cover what I asked. So if you want to give an overview, why don't we do that first? All
right, so pretty much the panel consists of 9 members. Right now, as it's currently constituted, we have 8. We're awaiting the 9th member. So we have 8 members. And what happens is a community member, if they feel that they have been the victim of or privy to information about police misconduct, can contact the panel directly, or they can reach out to FCPD Internal Affairs Bureau and make the complaint through them. So there are 2 ways to make the complaint. You can make it through the panel directly, or you can make a complaint through the Internal Affairs Bureau in Fairfax County Police Department. Once that complaint is made, an IAB case number is initiated, and the Internal Affairs Bureau looks into the allegation. At the conclusion of their investigation, they then allow the panel members to review their investigation. Based upon the panel's review, the panel can either agree with their findings or send the case back for further review. If a case is sent back for further review, then certainly my office would monitor that further review. And actually the initial investigation, there is a level of monitoring that the Office of the Executive Director is able to do as well. But once the case comes before the panel, they can either agree or disagree. If they disagree, it goes back for further review, and the panel is able to make recommendations based upon the request for further review.
Is it okay for me to ask questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what if somebody contacts the panel directly instead of the Internal Affairs Bureau? Do you route it to them, or can you start an investigation on your own panel?
Right, so if someone contacts the panel directly, then the panel will turn it over to IAB. Right now, the panel does not have independent investigative authority. That is, I've heard that that's the direction that the panel would like to go into. I believe that hiring an executive director is the first step toward that. One of the things that I've been able to do, I believe, is to begin to foster a workable relationship with FCPD, with Chief Davis, with the Internal Affairs Bureau, and so I am able to monitor to a degree the investigations, particularly the follow-up investigations if the panel so deems, but hopefully down the line, the panel itself, as with other civilian review panels, will have investigative authority.
And this is actually a question I was going to ask, but I like that it came from the community. It said, to be on the civilian review panel, is the person still chose by the chairperson? I'm assuming they mean, I don't know if they mean
The Board of Supervisors. Right. Right. The Board of Supervisors pick panel members. Yes.
Okay. And the follow-up question was a really good one, I think. Do you have any panel members who've been arrested in their lives?
No, none of the current panel members are former arrestees.
Okay. So let me build on top of that, because that's something that in previous discussions I've kind of brought up.
Okay.
If you're evaluating, I mean, a civilian review panel is not there because you want to give credit or praise to the police.
Right.
There's action or misconduct that gives citizens concern, fear, threatening, they don't feel safe, whatever it is. So is there a set type of, in terms of composition, is there an ideal composition? And is there what ends up coming, you know, in that pool of applicants to who gets selected? What I'm getting at is folks who've been on the wrong side of misconduct force, they should be on the panel because they have an experience that others just don't have. And they can articulate false statements, lies, mistruths, whatever, in a way that those who haven't been subjected to it can't.
Right. Well, I would say that I you know, I agree with that assessment. I agree. I believe that the panel was formed in 2016, and they were looking for, the Board of Supervisors were looking for a diverse group of panel members. I know that they want someone with law enforcement experience to be on the panel. You know, they look for people with differing backgrounds, but as it's currently constituted, there is no one that has a quote unquote criminal history. And that is something, that recommendation is something that I can certainly bring to the Board of Supervisors going forward, that I think that would be a helpful voice on the panel. Absolutely.
So I want to jump to a question. I think you kind of answered it. You said, are there panel members who are formerly police? And I think you've said there is.
Well, no, so that is the one vacant seat that we have currently, someone with law enforcement background, but it's my understanding that someone has been identified and it's just a matter of ratification, if you will, for that individual, and then he or she will be brought on. As executive director, obviously I come with a vast law enforcement background, but the panel members, we are waiting for the one law enforcement background panel member to be appointed.
So is there one space reserved for law enforcement,
Yes.
former law enforcement, or is that a minimum, or just make sure there's at least one?
That is a
Maximum.
minimum, right? That is a minimum, right? There's one space that it is ideally meant for someone with law enforcement background, and so that is the one position. That is the one panel position that is vacant currently.
Okay, but others who have law enforcement background can be on it, or no?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So to that, well, going back to something you said about whether somebody has a criminal history or not, and I want to be more precise, it doesn't matter whether they have a criminal history, it's have they been on the wrong side of police misconduct? Because there's plenty of people.
Okay, I see your point.
Criminal record or background who've been subjected to excessive force or misconduct.
Right. So, okay, that is a very distinct delineation. Absolutely. if you're saying that you want someone who feels that he or she has been the victim of police misconduct, not just someone that has been through the arrest process.
Right.
Okay, totally
Or,
understood.
you know what? And sharing legal redress, we receive discrimination complaints, and a lot of the complaints, it may be folks who have never been actually arrested, or at least
Right,
the reporter was not arrested, but it was their treatment was
right.
problematic. So even if they weren't arrested, however they were dealt with,
Mhm.
they didn't feel it was proper. So
Well, I'll
if
tell you,
there's,
well, no, I was going to say, if that is the standard, we do have individuals that, in speaking to them and them sharing their personal narratives with me, have had their own encounters with law enforcement in the past, some not so glowing. And so you do have individuals that do bring a level of sensitivity based upon the historical context or personal context.
Mhm. So what is the process for somebody to apply, express interest, and then, what is the tenure for serving on the panel?
So if someone is interested, they can shoot an email to my office. I can make sure that you all have my email address. I believe Luke has it, but I can make sure that you have my email address. And that's the great thing. Now with this inaugural position, there's a full-time person that people can communicate with. Prior to that, it was all voluntary, and panel members have, many different responsibilities. So that was a challenge for the panel. So now you can just forward any interest to the Office of the Executive Director, and I can get that to the Board of Supervisors. The tenure is a 2-year tenure, I believe, but you can be reappointed. Like you serve 2 years and then they get someone else, but you can come back, after waiting a year, you can come back onto the panel. But it's a 2-year appointment initially.
Okay. And you may not know the answer to this, but what's the criteria for somebody to be put on panel?
You're right. I do not know the answer to that. I don't want to misspeak, give incorrect information. But I do know that the Board of Supervisors, primarily Chairman McKay, is the one. They have to be appointed by the board. So what will happen is, if there's anyone that is interested, again, you can submit those names to me. I will get them to the board, and then someone will reach out and do the due diligence, and then make, see if they fit the criteria that the board has established.
I would recommend that there be greater transparency about that, because as you know, I'm sure you know, maybe other folks on this call don't know, Chairman McKay is a deputy reserve sheriff.
Yes.
So there should always be, even whether or not it's happening, if there's a presumption of bias, there needs to be something that's affirmatively and proactively out there to fight against that and to inform that, so folks can be secure and, that actions are being made. Like, biases are very hard to counter, but if you're informed of them, you can take things to, address them or limit the impact they may have. I think that's something that should be at the forefront. If anybody who makes a decision has a connection to particular affinity or history with law enforcement, that needs to be put out front, and
Absolutely.
they need to be really transparent with what the criteria is, because suppose you get 100 applications. I'm just making this up. I don't know. You get 100 applications, and maybe 20 of them are from former law enforcement, and maybe 5 of them get on it and the other 80 don't. All we have is a panel of, okay, the board selected these folks. We have no idea how many people expressed interest and what criteria was used in determining whether they'd be on. So I think there needs to be greater transparency on that, because as you said, and as I've lamented, the civilian review panel does not have enough teeth right now. And if we don't even know the criteria with which they're put on, that only further serves to hurt their credibility.
Well, one thing I can commit tonight is that just based upon sitting in for the duration of this meeting, that my office will work very closely with the Fairfax County NAACP. And what I would like your team to do, whether it comes from you or Luke or the general body, please feel free to submit recommendations directly to my office if you have any recommendations for this police civilian review panel. I can give you my word that I will present that to the Board of Supervisors. And that is something that I can commit to this evening, that I would certainly like to participate in your meetings going forward. And that if you have any recommendations, please feel free to forward them to me.
And if you have, if there's meetings where you're trying to broaden the scope and the authority, if it's something we can be a part of to help, let us know. Because I think you have plenty of folks who would be behind that. So another question, do you have a quarterly regular meeting structure where you review things? Or is it just ad hoc as things come up, you get a certain amount, you review them? What is the rhythm like right now? For the panel?
So the rhythm is that it is ad hoc. If a complaint is made, once a complaint comes in, it goes to the Internal Affairs Bureau. So let's say if it comes to us first, we write it and then send it to the Internal Affairs Bureau. We contact the complainant, let them know that we have it and that it will be under review by FCPD Internal Affairs. Once they render their determination, we have a subcommittee process where the subcommittee will review the matter and render a finding on the matter based upon the subcommittee's review of the case. If the subcommittee believes that it requires full panel review, then we'll have a full panel meeting where everyone on the panel reviews the case. And then out of that, we can either agree with the Internal Affairs Bureau's findings or refer it back for further investigation. So it goes through a subcommittee. The subcommittee decides whether or not it needs full panel review. Then the full panel will make a decision as to next steps.
Okay.
I would say, Mike, thanks. We're at 8:30. I would just say that the comment that you made, Mike, about potentially expanding the authority of the Police Civilian Review Panel, it's an interesting and difficult question. I mean, I think that the first time I really thought about it, my first reaction was we should give the Police Civilian Review Panel a lot of authority and they should be able to do independent investigations. And maybe that's where you and other members of the branch and a lot of advocacy people would land. And I just view it as a very difficult question because, and I'm sort of interested in your response, Stephen. The people who are on the Police Civilian Review Panel are volunteers.
Yes.
If the Police Civilian Review Panel, and one of the things that people have discussed is giving the Police Civilian Review Panel the authority to impose discipline. If you give the Police Civilian Review Panel the authority to impose discipline, then all of a sudden a lot of lawyers are going to get involved. It's going to become very difficult. Right. And what is a volunteer position is going to become a full-time job. Right. And so there's a lot of tension and back and forth there. It's not an easy question, and it's something you got to think long and hard about to find the right balance. And I have thought about it. I mean, not exhaustively. I'm sure Stephen has thought about it more than I have, but it reaching the right level of authority for people on the Police Civilian Review Panel for that organization is difficult. So if people want to get involved and work on that issue and think about that issue, I mean, you see how much effort it takes for Matt, the data panel, he spent 2 years analyzing the daylights out of a very complicated topic. This is another one. There are a whole bunch of them in criminal justice. So if people are interested in that and want to get involved, I would say, let me know, and we'll work on that on a subcommittee. You can work with Stephen on that.
If I can just jump in really quickly.
Please do.
It's my understanding. So in addition to the Police Civilian Review Panel, there's also the Office of the Independent Police Auditor. And so that is an office that looks exclusively at use of force. That is my colleague, Richard Schott. The OIPA has the ability to monitor investigations in real time. I believe that now with the establishment of an executive director for the panel, now that there is a full-time office established, that is the direction that things will move in. And then over time, what can evolve is that there will be a level of investigative activity that the OIPA or the executive director of the Police Civilian Review Panel can engage in. But that's from what I've heard since I've been here, I've just come on in February, so I'm literally in my 4th month, 120 days basically on this job. And so it's my understanding that is the direction that things can move in. Again, there are similar bodies around the country that do have investigative authority. And but that is going to be something that I believe that the Board of Supervisors will look at down the line. But at least a great first step was made in that now there is a full-time person. So the volunteer aspect of the panel was addressed in that now they have a full-time individual that can move things forward.
And let me
We're
get
we're a little bit over time. So Mike, if you want to do one more question, and I'm going to ask everybody if you can just give us a few more minutes. We have one more presentation after this by our Education Committee Chair, Dr. Sujatha Hampton. So if we can just start wrapping this up so we can move to the next presentation and conclude the meeting.
Thank you. So Luke, as you said, and I know you're not undervaluing it, but volunteer time is what got us here tonight, what keeps many of us here. So volunteer time is very valuable. And here's the thing, we're taxpayers. And when police are found guilty of misconduct or liable of misconduct, we have to pay it. So we should have a role in determining actions and conduct for them or consequences. I think it's a discussion, whether it's difficult or not, it needs to be had, because do we want to have people who are being murdered? We want to cut that off before it gets to it. So I think who better than the citizens in this county to take a more active role? And Stephen, this is a question for you to close out.
Yes.
If there are certain communities who have experienced a disproportionate amount of attention, harassment, are under fear, or just feel threatened by the police, can they call for the civilian review panel to hold a meeting, convene like a community panel where they can share those concerns? Is that something they
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I will say is this, it looks like there are 31 comments or questions in the chat. Please feel free to forward all of them to my office. To answer your question directly, Mike, absolutely. One of my main purposes in taking on this responsibility is to get out into the community, to speak with community partners, to bring you the community before the panel, I would love to have the NAACP come and speak to the panel about the work. I think that it's all about partnership. It's all about transparency. It's all about communication. And I am committed to that. So again, please feel free to reach out to me telephonically or by email. We can sit down and discuss these things and create an action plan where we can work in tandem toward creating a more safe and just Fairfax County.
Well, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I met you a few months ago at the Citizens Police Academy, so it's fantastic seeing you again. And as Luke and Mike said earlier, thank you for squeezing us in on such a really quick turnaround. And I do believe that the way that the conversation's going, it warrants more opportunities for you to come back and speak with us with longer time, of course, but I do appreciate, this was a fantastic introductory conversation, and whatever the Fairfax County NAACP branch can do to help you reach out to the community and identify community-based solutions for anything that the Civilian Review Panel is going through, please let us know. we will be there and we will be more than happy to present to the panel. So we will
Excellent.
definitely talk to you offline and kind of finalize those details. And
Yes.
again, thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
All right, so right now what we're going to do is thank you everyone for sticking with us. We're almost done with our program. We were going to have a thank you kind of dedication to Dr. Scott Brabrand for his great work with the Fairfax County Public Schools. I know he was going to try and squeeze us in. I have not seen him.
I have updates.
You have updates.
I have
So,
updates.
Sujata, thank you so much for being here and doing this and squeezing us in. I know you're under the weather, so we're going to make it quick, and thank you for sticking with us.
Thank you so much. Apologize for my sound. I have COVID, which is great. So, I don't sound great, but I did text with Dr. Brabrand. He is currently he's at a dinner at a dinner for a superintendent's association dinner, and he is currently getting an award there. So he was trying to step out of there and join us tonight, and he can't step out because he is getting another award. It's a night of plaudits for Dr. Brabrand. But I just wanted to share with you just sort of briefly what I was going to say to him. And I'll make it much shorter than I was going to. Many of you are with us in March of 2020, we had scheduled our first NAACP town hall on race, and then COVID hit. We weren't able to do that. So we rescheduled it for May. And Dr. Brabrand, any of you who know him, he's a really sort of a game sort, he's game for whatever. And he was like, okay, let's do it. Let's have this meeting. And it was a really rough one. It was a pretty brutal one, and we just laid it all out there for him. There's a lot of stuff with regard to race in our schools. And that was a really brutal meeting, but rather than backing away from us, rather than being afraid to talk to us, it was the beginning of a really powerful relationship that we built with FCPS and with Dr. Brabrand. And we started talking regularly. We had our second town hall on racism in school racism in August of 2020. And that was, it was like a bloodbath. It was really brutal. It was very brutal. I brought all the data, everything. And I told him, you're not allowed to have any slides. All the slides will be from us, because in May, I had a lot of complaints. Why are they doing so? They were trying to drown us in PowerPoint, so to speak. But he was game for that too. He said, okay, we won't bring any slides. And so I had all the slides, and they were brutal slides, one after another. And showing the sort of really seriously disparate issues of access and achievement and discipline, et cetera, on racial issues, on race-based rather. So even with that, he didn't back away from us. And we've had this really extremely productive relationship that was being built. And around the same time, we started looking into literacy. And a lot of you have heard me over the last couple of years talking about literacy to the general membership. And after a lot of research, we wrote a whole letter. We did all of the stuff. And in March of 2021, I had a meeting with Dr. Brabrand with two of his senior leadership. And I told him, you're going to have to do something about the literacy. We're not going to tolerate this anymore. And rather than shying away from that, rather than backing down, he just leaned into it. 2 months later, they had committed to changing their paradigm to teach reading. And this had been going on forever. Really disparate results for a long time, and like they just made that decision, and they did it. And that summer they began the steering committee, and all this stuff started going into place, and now training is in place, and kids are beginning their work, and capacity is being built in the organization. And it blows our mind every time we go to a steering committee meeting. We cannot believe the alacrity with which they made this happen, and that had everything to do with this sort of leaning in that Dr. Brabrand did with us, with the NAACP. And we really appreciated that so much. And so we wanted to thank him, because that one change alone, the literacy change, is going to impact just hundreds of thousands of kids. It's going to impact so many people. And when Fairfax changes, so does the rest of Virginia. This had an impact in changing the law. The legislation was changed. That's going to change the pre-service preparation in universities. It's an altogether good thing. And and I'm really grateful to him. So I wanted us to say thank you officially. We're gonna send him a little certificate of thanks and a little gift from the branch, because a lot of powerful work was done under with this relationship. And I'm hoping to continue that with the new superintendent that's coming in. That's also, as you may remember, that was a rough beginning too. But like I said in the letter, there is no rough beginning that cannot be changed for the better, as we, as evidenced with Dr. Bergman, because a lot of stuff happened, did not start out so great. So I have high hopes, and we wanted to say thank you to him. So he's not here because it's a day of plaudits for Dr. Bergman, but I would share with you what I was going to say to him, and that's it.
Thank you, Sujatha. And we'll be sure to circle back with Dr. Brabrand and get the certificate out to him and his Fairfax County NAACP sweatshirt, so he'll remember us during the cold months that we are going to have in a few months. So, or maybe I should just do a t-shirt since we're just about to start summer. So, well, he will definitely get a gift from us and in our appreciation. So thank you for all the hard work. And thank you to the Criminal Justice Committee and Mike. So thank you, Matt, Luke, and Mike, for having such an informative and productive conversation with Supervisor Lusk and Stephen Richardson from the Civilian Review panel. So with that, I would like to say thank you so much for sticking with us for an extra 15 or so minutes. Please, if you're, one of the things I have to say is please make sure that you are receiving our newsletters. That is how we get our information about our meetings and all of our different events. We've got a lot of great things lined up towards the throughout the end of the year. Join us in July as we talk about the affordable housing. We'll hear from Committee Chair Mary Patton, and then of course join us in August when we have it in person. So thank you again. I wish everybody a safe and happy night, and we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thanks.
Night,
Safe
everybody.
roads.